Dinner at Delphine Row was the only family ritual I was still invited to. The price of admission was bruises under the table. "Be polite," my father said, raising his wine glass. My stepmother's foot, Dahlia's, shot out, a sharp kick to my shin. They didn't know the watch on my wrist was recording my heart rate, the audio, and Dahlia's sharp intake of breath, the first piece of evidence for a revenge that would end at the company she controlled. My name is Sloane Keating. At 32, I am the head of risk management for North Spur Systems, a position that sounds far more powerful than it is. Tonight, my title means nothing. Here, in the soundproofed sanctuary of Delphine Row's most exclusive private dining room, I am merely a daughter, a stepdaughter, an inconvenient piece of a carefully curated family portrait. The room is an exercise in expensive, sterile comfort. The walls are paneled in a dark, polished wood that absorbs sound, turning our small chamber into a vacuum of forced intimacy. A single, dramatic floral arrangement of white orchids sits in the center of the table, its scent cloyingly sweet. The tablecloth is a sheet of pristine white linen, so heavily starched it cracks when you move. The silverware gleams under the soft, recessed lighting, each piece heavy and cold in my hand. Across from me, my father, Charles Keating, swirls a Pinot Noir in his glass, the deep red liquid catching the light. Beside him, my stepmother, Dahlia, smiles. It's a work of art, that smile. It doesn't touch her eyes. We are celebrating. The official reason is the successful quarter North Spur just closed, a triumph for which Dahlia, in her capacity as the company's lead PR consultant, is taking a silent victory lap. The real reason is that this is what we do. We perform normalcy. We enact the ritual of the happy, powerful family, and I am a required prop. A waiter, young and nervous, enters to clear our appetizer plates. Dahlia's smile widens, becoming warm, maternal. "Everything is just wonderful. Thank you," she says, her voice like honey. As the waiter turns his back to leave, her foot slides under the table. The sharp, pointed toe of her Louboutin heel digs directly into the bone of my shin. It's a precise, practiced movement, hidden entirely by the white linen. Pain, white-hot and immediate, shoots up my leg. I flinch, a micro-expression of shock that I instantly suppress. My jaw tightens, but my face remains a mask of placid neutrality. It is the third time in the last 10 minutes. The first was when I disagreed with my father about a market projection. The second was when I failed to laugh at one of his tired jokes. This one, I suspect, is just for maintenance. A reminder of the rules. "Be polite," my father says, his voice a low murmur. He isn't looking at me, but at his wine. The words aren't a suggestion. They are a verdict, an indictment delivered without the need for a trial. He didn't see the kick, or more likely, he chose not to see the aftermath. In his world, impoliteness is the cardinal sin, and any reaction to provocation is, by definition, impolite. He sees my tightened jaw, my stillness, and interprets it as dissent. Dahlia picks up the salt cellar, a delicate crystal thing, and dusts a few grains over her perfectly cooked filet mignon. She leans forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper that carries only to me. "Smile, sweetheart. You look so much prettier when you smile." The scent of her perfume, a heavy gardenia, drifts across the table, mixing with the aroma of roasted meat. It makes my stomach churn. My hand rests on the table, near my water glass. With a slow, deliberate movement, I reach for my watch, a sleek, minimalist device with a dark screen. I run my thumb over the bezel, a gesture that could be mistaken for checking the time or simply fidgeting. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration answers against my skin. The watch face remains dark, but a tiny green light on the underside, hidden against my wrist, pulses once. Environmental audio recording. Activated. The sensors, pressed against my pulse points, begin their silent work. My heart rate, which had been a steady 72, begins to climb. The watch logs the change. 84, 86, 93. It also measures the galvanic skin response, the faint sheen of sweat that a lie detector would recognize as stress, the pressure of the watch against my skin, the slight indentation it leaves. All of it is data, tangible, measurable, and now, recorded. "Sloan, we need to talk about your attitude at work," my father says, setting his glass down. He adopts his boardroom tone, the one that says, "This is for your own good." "Grant Ellery mentioned you were abrasive in the quarterly review, questioning the data from the marketing team in front of everyone. It's not a good look." Grant Ellery is our CEO, a handsome, charismatic man who looks great on the cover of business magazines. He is also a puppet. His strings are held by Halicon Gate, the private equity fund that owns a controlling stake in Northspur, and the primary advisor to Halicon Gate, the shadow shareholder who whispers in the fund manager's ear, is a mysterious figure known only as Mrs. Alabaster. Mrs. Alabaster is Dahlia. She is the company's PR consultant, a role that gives her unfettered access and a plausible reason for being in every important meeting. But her real job is to protect Halicon Gate's investment, to shape the narrative, and to eliminate anything, or anyone, she perceives as a risk. "I wasn't being abrasive," I say, my voice level. "I was managing risk. The numbers were inflated to support a product launch we aren't ready for. My job is to point that out." "Your job," my father counters, his voice hardening, "is to be a team player. There are incredible opportunities for you at Northspur, a path to the C-suite. But you have to learn to fit the culture. You can't be so stubborn. It comes across as impolite." There it is again, politeness, the cage they built for me. I look at Dahlia. She is watching me, that serene smile still fixed on her face, but her eyes are cold, analytical. She takes a delicate sip of her wine. She is the architect of Northspur's corporate culture, the author of its infamous civility clause, a vague and terrifyingly effective policy that allows management to discipline employees for making others feel uncomfortable. It's a weapon designed to silence dissent, and it is aimed squarely at me. I remain silent, my mind a whirl of calculations. The watch on my wrist is my own risk management tool. It is logging the tremor in my father's voice as he lectures me, the soft clink of Dahlia's wineglass against her teeth, the subtle change in her breathing. It is building a baseline. I let the silence stretch, counting my own heartbeats as they slowly begin to descend from their peak. 93, 91, 88. Control. Slowly, I reach for the heavy linen napkin in my lap. I fold it once, then again, before placing it on the table to my left. The gesture is tidy, final, woven into the hem, indistinguishable from the other threads, is a tiny, flexible NFC tag I had sewn in myself that morning. It's inert, invisible, waiting for a signal. "If you'll excuse me," I say, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly polite. "I need to make a quick call to HR, just to follow up on a query." My father frowns. "Now? Can't it wait?" Dahlia places a restraining hand on his arm. "Let her go, Charles. It's probably important." Her eyes meet mine, and there is a flicker of triumph in them. She thinks she's won. She thinks this dinner, these kicks, this lecture, have broken me, that I'm running off to make a panicked, emotional call that will only incriminate me further. I stand, my chair making no sound on the thick carpet. I smooth down my dress and walk toward the door. As I pass the table, I let my left hand, the one holding my phone, swing naturally by my side. For a single, fluid second, the phone passes over the folded napkin. My phone buzzes once in my palm. The connection is made. The NFC tag is triggered, executing a pre-written script on my device. A secure connection is opened to a private server. A single, encrypted packet of data is transmitted. The command is simple. Civility Review, Phase 1, Activate. I don't actually go to the restroom. I step out into the main restaurant. The gentle hum of conversation and the clatter of cutlery, a welcome relief from the soundproof tomb. I walk to the end of the hall. stand for a moment looking out the large window at the glittering lights of Holloway, and then I walk back. When I return, the main course has been served. My steak sits before me, cooked a perfect medium rare. I sit down and pick up my knife and fork. I eat my dinner. I listen as my father discusses a new golf club he's thinking of buying. I watch Dahlia charm him, laughing at his jokes, her hand resting on his. I say nothing. I am the very picture of politeness. Later that night, as I stand in my own apartment, I peel off the tailored dress and the suffocating expectations that come with it. A large, dark bruise is blooming on my shin, tender and angry to the touch. I don't need to photograph it. The memory is enough for now. I pull the watch from my wrist and place it in its charging cradle. The cradle is also a data dock. The file transfer begins immediately. It's a small file, just a few megabytes. The audio is crystal clear, filtered for background noise, the clink of silverware, the murmur of the waiter, and then my father's voice, as clear as a bell. Be polite. Then, Dahlia's whisper. Smile, sweetheart. It's all there, time-stamped and cross-referenced, with the biometric data showing a sudden spike in my heart rate and stress levels. It is the first entry in a very long ledger. It is the beginning, in my apartment. The only light comes from the city outside and the small, pulsing green LED on the data dock. The audio file from the watch has finished transferring. I play it back, not through speakers, but through noise-canceling headphones. The digital silence of the recording is profound, a perfect, clean canvas. Then, the sounds of the dinner party, artificially clear, the clink of silver on porcelain, the subtle slide of a wine glass on linen, and then, my father's voice, resonant and firm. Be polite. A beat of silence, then Dahlia's, a venomous whisper wrapped in silk. Smile, sweetheart. I listened to it 3 times. The audio file is a perfect, sterile fact. It exists in stark contrast to the world I was raised in, a world built on the soft, shifting sands of appearances. The walls of my father's Holloway estate are covered in evidence of this world. There is one portrait in particular, hanging in the grand entryway, that Dahlia commissioned 2 Christmases ago. We are all wearing matching beige cashmere sweaters. We are standing in front of a fireplace that hasn't been lit in years, holding matching porcelain mugs that were, for the photo, filled with lukewarm, instant hot cocoa. My father looks distinguished. Dahlia looks adoringly at him, her hand resting on his chest, and I am there, on the edge of the frame, smiling. It is a terrible, stiff smile, a rictus of compliance that took Dahlia 20 minutes of hissed corrections to achieve. Higher, Sloane, your eyes, look like you want to be here. That photograph is the family's official story. It is a lie, from the cashmere to the cocoa. Family is a brand. Sloane. My father has always said, it's his favorite mantra, repeated at birthdays, graduations, and any time I failed to live up to the marketing, before Dahlia. The brand was one of quiet, old money stability. It was functional, if emotionally arid, but Dahlia didn't just join the brand. She executed a hostile takeover. She is a PR professional to her bones, and she understood something my father didn't. A brand doesn't have to be real. It just has to be consistent. She provided the new branding, a gleaming, modern veneer of philanthropic kindness, effortless elegance, and manufactured warmth. She wrote the press releases for our lives. The Keating family. We care. The rules I grew up with, the subtle ones my mother instilled, were the tinder. Dahlia was the match. My mother's rules were about deference. A woman speaks softly. A woman yields the floor. A woman apologizes first, especially when she has been wronged, because it is her job to be the peacemaker. It is her job to absorb the discomfort of others. I grew up learning to make myself smaller, to sand down my sharp edges, to never, ever make a scene. When my father remarried, Dahlia took that foundation of polite submission and built a prison on it. Our family dinners, once merely dull, transformed into attitude training. My father, relieved to have someone else manage the emotional labor of a family, ceded all control. Dahlia became the arbiter of what was acceptable. Any question was confrontational. Any differing opinion was argumentative. Any attempt to defend myself was, invariably, lagniappe, that was her favorite word, borrowed from New Orleans, meaning a little something extra. To her, my self-defense was an unnecessary, distasteful excess, and the punishment for all these sins was the same, the label of impolite. Sloane, you're being impolite. 3 words that could stop my father's heart. 3 words that meant I had failed the brand. 3 words that always made him take her side. The kicks under the table were just a physical reinforcement of the psychological cage. Don't speak, don't react, don't exist outside the script. Dahlia taught me 2 lessons, and she taught them well. The first was to smile for the pictures, no matter what. The second was to be silent in the meetings, no matter what. She believed these lessons would make me manageable. She was wrong. They made me invisible. And in my invisibility, I found a new place to exist. The cold, hard certainty of data. I didn't go into finance or law. The traditional paths for a Keating, I chose risk management. I chose it precisely because it is the opposite of everything my family stands for. There is no politeness in a spreadsheet. A number cannot be gaslit. A balance sheet doesn't care about your tone. My job is to find the anomalies, the irregularities, the things that don't add up. Numbers don't know how to deliver a stinging kick under a table, but they are very, very good at showing you the irregular trail of money flowing into an offshore account. I am, at my core, an auditor. Dahlia and my father taught me to suppress my emotions. So I did. I channeled them into a different kind of accounting. Every time I was told to be polite, every time a pointed heel found my shin, every time I was silenced in a meeting, I went home and I logged it. I have spreadsheets, time, date, location, specific phrasing, witnesses present, emotional context, physical result, if any. I am the chief accountant of my own systematic abuse. It is a ledger of violence, kept with the dispassionate precision of a forensic auditor. The file from my watch, with its biometric spike and clean audio, is the first entry in that ledger that is not just a memory, it is proof, it is an asset. The hypocrisy is what sharpens my resolve. Dahlia's public-facing life is a masterpiece of deception. Her Instagram account is a pastel-colored dreamscape of inspirational quotes about kindness, tagged photos from charity galas, and candid-looking shots of her mentoring young women at North Spur. In a world where you can be anything, be kind. One caption reads, above a picture of her smiling with the CEO of a children's hospital. Her emails, however, are steel. As head of risk, I am copied on certain high-level communications, often, I suspect, as a warning. The emails she sends to our CEO, Grant Ellery, under her D. Keating address are one thing: firm, professional, heavily couched in corporate jargon, but the other emails, the ones I've managed to trace, the ones from Mrs. Alabaster at a private, encrypted domain to the holding fund, those are different. They are cold, precise, and utterly ruthless. They speak of managing human assets, neutralizing internal friction, and recalibrating the narrative. I am internal friction. She is not a PR consultant. She is a cleaner. Living in this house, in this company, has forced me to become bilingual. I have learned to translate the dual language of polite society. I'm just trying to help you succeed, sweetheart. Translates to, get in line, or I will destroy you. I'm concerned about your confrontational tone means you're getting too close to the truth. And the ultimate weapon, let's all just be polite, means shut up. It is the word used to silence women, to end arguments, to protect abusers, and to maintain a corrupt and brittle status quo. So I started writing my own dictionary, a private lexicon. In my dictionary, family is defined as a branding exercise. Love is a leverage point, and politeness is the most effective and insidious tool of control ever invented, a muzzle disguised as a virtue. I close the audio file and eject the watch from the dock. I look at the bruise on my shin, which has deepened to a nasty shade of purple blue. It is a data point. It is a receipt for services rendered. Dahlia thinks she is training a daughter. She has no idea she has been training a whistleblower. The day after the dinner at Delphine Row, I walked into the North Spur Systems headquarters with the faint, phantom ache in my shin, serving as a metronome for my thoughts. The office is a landscape of open-plan spaces, glass walls, and motivational posters with words like innovate and collaborate in a clean sans serif font. It's designed to look transparent, but it is the most opaque place I have ever known. And the mechanism of that opacity is a single paragraph in our employee handbook, Policy 7.4, the Civility Clause. It was Dahlia's magnum opus, drafted during her first year as our PR consultant. It was presented to the board as a progressive initiative to foster a psychologically safe and respectful workplace. On paper, it looks laudable. In practice, it is a weapon of mass silencing. The clause states that any employee can be subject to disciplinary action, up to and including termination, for behavior that makes colleagues feel disrespected, uncomfortable, or otherwise disinclined to collaborate. The key is that it requires no concrete evidence, no slurs, no threats, no explicit harassment. All it requires is a feeling. It replaced the objective standard of misconduct with the subjective standard of comfort. It was a tool built to prosecute a crime that has no definition and leaves no evidence. It was a net woven from shadows, and it was designed specifically to catch people like me, people who ask questions that make powerful people uncomfortable. My job is to make people uncomfortable. As the head of risk management, I am paid to find the cracks in the facade. 6 months ago, during a routine audit of our data security protocols, I found more than a crack. I found a chasm. North Spur collects vast amounts of user data, and we are legally required to submit anonymized datasets to a federal commission for regulatory oversight. I found a security report, buried 3 levels deep in a restricted server, detailing the pre-submission data processing. The report called the process hygienic cleansing. A more accurate term would be systematic fraud. Entire segments of user data, specifically those that showed negative engagement with our flagship product, were being scrubbed before the reports were sent to the commission. Our user satisfaction numbers weren't just good, they were impossibly artificially perfect. It was a lie, told in terabytes, and it constituted a federal crime. This discovery put the entire power structure of the company into sharp relief. Our CEO, Grant Ellery, is the handsome, smiling face of North Spur. He is a master of the keynote speech and the shareholder call. But his signature on our regulatory filings is a forgery in spirit, if not in fact. He signs what he is told to sign. The orders come from Halicon Gate, the equity fund that owns us, and the voice of Halicon Gate, the strategist in the shadows, is Mrs. Alabaster. Is Dahlia? I knew she was being paid, of course. The official story was that her PR firm was on a modest retainer, but the numbers never felt right. The value she provided as a shadow operator for Halicon was immense. A simple retainer was an insult, so I started digging into the budget. Line by line, I found it under discretionary communications consulting, a series of massive recurring payments to a vendor I'd never heard of. Gray Veil Media. The company had no website, no public presence. Its registered address was a P.O. box in Delaware. The amounts were staggering, far beyond any legitimate PR expense. On her official conflict of interest disclosure, Dahlia had listed that she provided occasional pro bono advisory services to a small media startup called Gray Veil. Pro bono. The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't just hiding her influence. She was laundering her payment for it right under the company's nose, billing North Spur for the service of its own manipulation. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The subject line was simply, "A quick chat." It was from Maria, our head of HR. "Sloan, it read. I'd like to find some time to discuss feedback regarding your collaborative approach in recent team meetings. Please come by my office at 4 p.m. At 4 p.m., I walked into Maria's glass-walled office. She was a pleasant woman in her 50s with a carefully neutral expression that was, in its own way, as manufactured as Dahlia's smile. Grant Ellery was already there, sitting in one of the guest chairs, an ambush. He was meant to be the friendly, concerned face of authority. "Sloan, thanks for coming in," he began, steepling his fingers. "We wanted to talk about your tone. We've received some feedback that your style can be abrasive, that you're not always a team player. It's making people uncomfortable." I sat perfectly still. I didn't ask who people were. I didn't ask for specific examples. To do so would be to fall into their trap. It would be impolite. Instead, I smiled. A small, controlled smile. In my mind. I was holding my ledger, the one that detailed every kick, every whispered threat, every silenced opinion. That ledger was my armor. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, Grant," I said, my voice even and measured. "My only goal is to protect the company. If my communication style is hindering that, I am, of course, open to feedback." They were not prepared for my compliance. They had expected me to argue, to be defensive, to give them the very impoliteness they could then use against me. My placid agreement seemed to throw Grant off his script. He glanced at Maria, who cleared her throat and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "As part of our commitment to professional development," she said, the corporate jargon flowing effortlessly, "we've drafted a performance improvement plan. It's just a way to set some clear goals for you to work on your soft skills and better integrate with the team culture." A PIP, the corporate death sentence. It was a formal, documented path to firing me. I picked it up. It was filled with vague, unmeasurable goals. Exhibit a more positive and collaborative demeanor. Seek to build consensus rather than focusing on obstacles. Actively contribute to a civil and respectful workplace environment. It was Dahlia's philosophy, weaponized and written down. I was being officially reprimanded for doing my job. "I see," I said, after reading it carefully. "This seems straightforward." "So you'll sign it?" Grant asked, a little too quickly. The relief in his voice was palpable. "Of course," I said. "I am, as always, committed to North Spur's success." I reached into my blazer and pulled out my own pen. It was a beautiful pen. A classic fountain pen with a glossy black barrel and a silver nib. It was also a high-resolution camera. The lens, no bigger than a pinprick, was perfectly concealed just above the clip. I clicked the cap, an action that turned the device on, and signed my name at the bottom of the page. My signature was firm and clear. I signed away my right to ask hard questions. I signed my own corporate death warrant. And as I did, the pen recorded the entire document, the faces of Grant and Maria, their expressions a mixture of relief and smug satisfaction. I handed the signed paper back to Maria. "Thank you both for your guidance," I said, standing up. "I'll get right to work on these goals." I walked out of her office and back to my own, my composure perfect. I closed my door, sat at my desk, and took a single, deep breath. The performance was over. That night, I went home and executed the next phase. First, I finalized my official risk report. It was a masterpiece of cold, hard facts. It detailed the hygienic cleansing of the user data, citing the specific lines of code in the processing script. It included the internal security report I had uncovered. It detailed the fraudulent inflation of our key performance indicators and the direct legal exposure to the company and its executive officers. At 10:00 p.m., I uploaded the 48-page PDF to North Spur's internal compliance server. It was now part of the official record, time-stamped and immutable, an untouchable fact. They could no longer claim ignorance. Then, I opened a separate, encrypted channel. I attached the same report. I attached the audio file from Delphine Rowe. I attached a high-resolution image of the signed PP, captured by my pen. I attached my private ledger, the meticulous, multi-year record of harassment and abuse, and I sent it all to a man I had never met, a lawyer who specialized in representing corporate whistleblowers, with a one-line message, "As discussed, please proceed." The script I had triggered with the NFC tag at the restaurant, Civility Review, Phase 1, had begun a slow, silent data scrape, mirroring specific corporate servers to an off-site, secure location under my control. Sending the email to my lawyer was Phase 2. Dahlia had built a system around a single, powerful idea, that politeness could be used as a weapon to enforce silence. She was about to learn that I agreed. I wasn't fighting her rules. I was using them. She wanted a civil and respectful workplace. I was going to give it to her. Signing the performance improvement plan was like painting a target on my back. I had agreed to their terms, admitted I was abrasive, and in doing so, I had given them the justification for what came next. The corporate machine, guided by Dahlia's invisible hand, began to dismantle my professional life, piece by piece, not with a sledgehammer, but with the quiet, insidious precision of a virus. It started digitally. On Wednesday morning, I logged in to find my calendar nearly empty. A strategic planning session I was scheduled to lead? Canceled. Pending agenda review, the quarterly risk assessment meeting with the finance heads? Rescheduled without a new time. With a note. We'll circle back. Important invitations, the ones from the executive level, began to bypass my inbox entirely. When I searched for them, I found them languishing in my spam folder, their headers flagged as promotional. I filed a ticket with IT. They responded 24 hours later with a templated email. Our filters are functioning as designed. We have detected no irregularities. It was a digital gaslighting. I was being erased from the conversation. The physical isolation followed. My project team, the 3 analysts who reported directly to me, were reassigned. The official email from HR cited a new Agile workflow initiative, requiring them to be embedded with the product teams. Their desks, which had formed a small pod with mine, were moved to the other side of the building. One morning I came in, and they were just gone. A new hire from marketing was sitting in my analyst's chair. When I logged into Slack, I found I could no longer access Core Strategy, the channel where all senior leadership communicated. The icon was gone. When I tried to search for it, the app returned. This channel does not exist, or you do not have permission to view it. I was a ghost at a desk, a manager with no one to manage, a leader with no one to lead. They were building a case for my redundancy, documenting my lack of engagement while actively preventing me from engaging. This was the soft part of the takedown. Then came Dahlia's direct assault. Grant Ellery, our CEO, forwarded me an email chain. The original message was from Dahlia, addressed to him and Maria in HR. Grant, it read, further to our concerns about Sloane's abrasive style. I'm attaching an audio file from last week's budget projection meeting. As you can hear, her tone is incredibly heavy and uncollaborative. This is what we're up against. I clicked the file, a 3-minute MP3. My own voice filled my ears, sounding cold and hard. The projections are fundamentally unsound, I heard myself say. The burn rate is unsustainable, and the projected Q4 revenue is based on a product that hasn't even cleared legal. The clip ended there, on my stark, unvarnished criticism. I listened to it again, my blood running cold. I remembered that meeting. I remembered exactly what happened. I opened my own audio log from that day, recorded by my watch. I found the corresponding section. Dahlia's clip had been expertly edited. She had cut out the 30 seconds before my statement, when the head of marketing interrupted me mid-sentence to say, "Sloane, let's not get bogged down in the negative details." She had cut out the 5 seconds after my statement, when I had offered a solution. But if we adjust the timeline and reallocate the dev budget, we can de-risk the launch. She had surgically removed all context, all attempts at collaboration, and left only the unpolite friction. She was creating a record of my non-compliance. My first instinct was to forward my own unedited recording, to shout, "This is a lie! Here is the proof. But I stopped myself. That was the trap. That was the emotional, abrasive reaction they wanted. It would only prove their point. I would not respond with emotion. I would respond with data. I spent the next 2 days compiling a new report. It was not a risk assessment. It was a communication audit. Using the audio logs from my watch, I analyzed the last 12 senior meetings I had attended. I created a spreadsheet. Column A, meeting date. Column B, speaker. Column C, gender. Column D, duration of speaking time. Column E, number of interruptions. Column F, interrupter. The data was chillingly clear. In those 12 meetings, I had spoken for a total of 41.5 minutes. I had been interrupted 87 times. My male colleagues, who had spoken for a combined 342 minutes, had been interrupted 19 times, mostly by other men. The average speaking turn for a woman, me, as I was often the only one, before being interrupted was 28 seconds. The average for a man was 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I sent the report to Grant and Maria. My cover email was a model of polite, constructive language, a perfect echo of my PP. Dear Grant and Maria, I wrote, thank you again for the feedback on my communication style. In the spirit of professional development, I've conducted a small audit of our recent meetings to identify communication patterns. The attached data suggests a potential systemic issue with interruptions that may be perceived as a lack of collaboration. I believe addressing this could benefit everyone's ability to contribute. I look forward to discussing how we can foster a more inclusive and uninterrupted dialogue. I had just called them all sexists, but I had done it using their language. I had used data. I had been perfectly, lethally polite. The response was immediate silence. No one replied to the email, but the next move on the board was theirs. My isolation was now a strategic advantage. I needed time, and I needed a secure network. Far from the prying eyes of North Spur's IT department, I sent another email to Maria. In line with my new focus on collaborative integration, I wrote, I'd like to request a temporary flexible work arrangement. Working from home 2 days a week will allow me to dedicate focused time to the documentation and soft skill goals outlined in my PP, free from distraction. It was approved in under an hour. They were thrilled. They thought I was retreating, hiding, making myself even more irrelevant. They thought I was quietly accepting my fate, preparing to be fired. What they had actually done was grant me secure, unmonitored access to the private, mirrored data warehouse I had been building for months. From the safety of my apartment, on my own encrypted network, I no longer had to worry about keyword sniffers or network monitoring. I could finally follow the money. I went back to the Grayvale Media invoices. Now I had time. I cross-referenced the invoice dates with Dahlia's official North Spur calendar. A pattern emerged. A $150,000 invoice for crisis management strategy was dated March 12th. The crisis, a negative story in a tech blog about our product's security flaws, didn't even happen until April 1st. She was billing us for solving crises she knew about in advance, or perhaps ones she had even helped to shape. I found invoices for executive tone and style consultation, charging $25,000 a month. This was her fee for writing Grant's emails and coaching him on how to lie to the board. It was all there. The inflated invoices, the preemptive billing, the shadow salary for her work as Mrs. Alabaster, all being paid by the very company she was manipulating. But the real discovery came from a different direction. I was searching the server for any documents related to the civility clause. Trying to find its draft history, I found it, but it wasn't a PDF. It was a Word document, a .docm file. The M was the key. It meant the document contained macros. My pulse quickened. I downloaded the file into a secure sandbox environment. I opened the macro editor. It was beautiful, in a horrifying way. It was a civility handbook template, meant to be used by managers for performance reviews, but embedded within it was a script. The macro automatically scanned a user's sent items in Outlook. It searched for emails containing a specific list of keywords: risk, illegal, fraud, whistleblower, commission, Overtime. Harassment. If it found an email with these words, it didn't block it. It did something far more insidious. It automatically tagged that email in the metadata with a hidden flag. Uncollegial. It was an automated system for identifying and tagging dissent. My hands were shaking. This was the mechanism. This was the digital net. I looked at the macro's properties. Author. Dianike assistant. Dahlia's assistant. And then I checked the file's permissions. The digital signatures showing who had authorized its use on the company network. The final authorization, the one that gave it access to employee inboxes, was granted by one user, Grant Ellery, the CEO. I now had the gun, the bullet, and the fingerprint. The next day, I was in the office for an all-hands executive meeting. I was sitting at the back, invisible, my PP-mandated role as a silent observer. Grant was at the front, discussing a new Culture First initiative. I raised my hand. The room, full of VPs and directors, went quiet. I hadn't spoken in a meeting in weeks. Grant looked annoyed, but he couldn't ignore me in a public forum. Yes, Sloan? I stood up. I kept my voice light, curious, perfectly polite. Just a quick technical question on our new software policies. Grant, I was reviewing some of the manager handbooks, and I was so impressed by the automation. I was just wondering, who was the executive lead who decided to start using macros to programmatically filter employee emails for tone? You could have heard a pin drop. The blood drained from Grant's face. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He stared at me, his eyes cold and hard. The mask of the charismatic CEO was gone, replaced by the face of a cornered man. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 3. Then, he said it. The words that had defined my life, the words from the dinner party. He said it not as a reprimand, but as a threat. Be polite, Sloan. I held his gaze. I felt the eyes of every executive in the room on me. The old Sloan would have shrunk. The old Sloan would have apologized and sat down. Instead, I smiled. A slow, bright, genuine smile. Of course, I said. Then I sat down. The war was no longer invisible. It was now just a matter of choosing the battlefield for the final act. Grant's "be polite" in that meeting was not just a threat. It was an admission. It was the moment the mask of corporate professionalism slipped, revealing the skull of base coercion beneath. He had confirmed, in a room full of witnesses, that the company's rules were not rules at all, but weapons. And I knew that to win, I could not just be a victim, I had to be a prosecutor. My work shifted from discovery to evidence preparation. I was no longer just gathering data. I was building a case, piece by irrefutable piece. The first piece was physical. The Monday after that meeting, I went to see my personal physician. I had kept the starched linen napkin from the first dinner at Delphine Row, the one with the faint, waxy smear of Dahlia's lipstick. I had sealed it in a Ziploc bag. I presented it to Dr. Delani, a woman I trusted for her clinical detachment. I did not tell her the full story. I told her I was documenting an injury for a personal insurance claim. I see, she said, her voice betraying no judgment. She photographed the bruise on my shin, which had faded to a sickly constellation of yellow and purple. She used a clinical ruler for scale. Date of injury? 2 weeks ago, I said, giving her the exact date and time of the dinner. Cause of injury? Blunt force trauma, I said, my voice flat. Impact with a hard, narrow object, let's say, the edge of a table. She nodded, typing notes into my file. And the napkin? It's from the same table, I said. I'd like any trace on it documented, if possible, to establish location. She swabbed the lipstick smear, sealed the sample, and labeled it. She printed the photographs, signed and dated them, and handed me a copy along with a sealed envelope containing her official medical notes. File this with your claim, she said. I now had a time-stamped medical record from a licensed physician, documenting a physical injury consistent with a kick, linked by trace evidence to Dahlia's presence at that specific table. The second piece was digital integrity. The audio file from my watch, the one containing my father's "Be Polite" and Dahlia's "Smile, Sweetheart," was a treasure. But a file can be altered. I needed to preserve its metadata. I extracted the original, raw audio file, which contained not just the sound, but the time-stamped GPS coordinates of Delphine Rowe and the full, second-by-second biometric log of my heart rate spike. I uploaded this pristine file into a Swiss-based, zero-knowledge encrypted cloud vault. I used a 64-character passphrase I had long since memorized. I then took the watch itself, the pen camera containing the video of my PIP signing, and the original copy of Dr. Alani's report, and I placed them all in a new safe deposit box at a bank across town. The chain of custody was clean. The third piece required me to use their system against them. I needed the logs from the uncollegial email macro. Hacking the server would be a crime and would render the evidence inadmissible. So I used the front door. I filed a formal data subject access request with our own HR department. My request was a work of art, in polite subservience. Citing my performance improvement plan, I wrote, "In my good faith effort to align with the civility clause, I request a complete copy of all data the company holds pertaining to my performance, including any and all automated metadata tags, flags, or categorizations associated with my employee profile and corporate communications." It was an HR nightmare for them. To deny my request would be a clear violation of data privacy laws, the very laws I was in charge of managing risk for. To approve it, they assumed, would yield nothing they hadn't already told me. They approved it. A week later, a data technician, following protocol, sent me a massive, password-protected CSV file. I opened it, and there it was, a log spanning 6 months. Every email I had sent containing the keywords risk, fraud, overtime, or commission was flagged in an adjacent column with a single, damning word, uncollegial. The log showed the rule was authorized by G. Ellery and implemented by D.K. Assistant. I had them. The fourth piece was the money, the Gray Veil Media invoices. I had the screenshots of the inflated bills. I needed a baseline, using my flexible workdays. I created a burner email address and a fictitious consulting firm. I sent out proposal requests to 3 of Holloway's top-tier, legitimate PR firms. I asked for their standard rate cards for executive crisis management and corporate communications consulting. The proposals I got back were professional, detailed, and most importantly, far cheaper. I compared them side by side with the Gray Veil invoices. The most expensive, legitimate firm billed $20,000 a month for the executive tone consultation that Gray Veil charged $25,000 for. A $100,000 crisis management package from a real firm matched, item for item, the $148,000 bill from Gray Veil. When I aggregated the data over 2 years, the overbilling was consistent. Northspur had paid Gray Veil exactly 48% more than the highest market rate for identical services. This wasn't just influence, this was outright, systematic theft. The fifth and final piece was the linchpin, connecting Mrs. Alabaster and Gray Veil directly to Dahlia. I knew she was pro bono advisor, but that was just a story. I needed a legal link. I went back to the original master services agreement for Gray Veil, buried in the finance server's vendor archive. It was a scan of a signed paper contract. It was signed by a director of operations I didn't recognize. It looked clean, but Dahlia was arrogant. I knew her stationery. She had a fetish for expensive, bespoke paper. I zoomed in on the scanned PDF, pushing it to 800%. The signature was on standard contract paper. But the cover page was different. In the bottom left corner, almost invisible in the low-resolution scan, was an embossed watermark. It was faint, just a disturbance in the digital fibers of the paper. I screenshotted the area, opened it in an image editor, and began pushing the levels. I dropped the brightness, cranked the contrast to its maximum, and inverted the colors. The shadow bloomed into a clear, sharp, elegant monogram. DK, Dahlia Keating. She had used her own personal, monogrammed letterhead as the cover sheet for the contract of her own shell company. It was the kind of mistake only a true narcissist, someone who believed they were untouchable, could make. I closed the file. I had it all: the physical assault, the biometric verification of stress, the illegal email surveillance, the multi-million-dollar wire fraud, and the watermark signature linking it all back to her. The next day, I took a half-day of personal leave. I met Mr. Eris, my whistleblower lawyer, at a small, anonymous diner 30 miles outside Halloway. He was a quiet, meticulous man in a rumpled suit who looked more like an accountant than a litigator. I laid out printed copies of the evidence, one by one, on the formica table between us. I spoke for 30 minutes, without notes, in the calm, measured voice I had been practicing. He did not touch his coffee. He listened, his eyes moving from the medical report to the macro logs, to the watermark. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. He carefully stacked the papers into a neat pile. "Ms. Keating," he said, his voice quiet. "What you have here is not a labor dispute. It's a federal case, multiple federal cases, SEC violations, wire fraud, conspiracy." He looked at me. "Your job is not to present this. Your job is to stay invisible. They are waiting for you to scream. You must not." I nodded. "I understand. I am not going to be abrasive. I am going to be polite." We built the timeline. He would begin the sealed filings with the SEC and the Department of Justice, protecting my identity as a whistleblower. My task was internal. I had to set the final trap. And so I began to rehearse. I practiced my voice every night. I recorded myself on my phone, listening back, ensuring my tone was always humble, my words clear, my cadence non-combative. I was forging my politeness into a weapon, a sheath of impenetrable steel. I learned to ask, "I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand," in a way that sounded like a plea for help, but was in fact an accusation. A week later, I was ready. I called Delphine Rowe. "I'd like to book a private room for next Tuesday," I said, my voice warm. "A family celebration. Could we please have the Monarch Room? I hear the view is lovely." The Monarch Room, their largest private space, the one I knew from their events page was wired for corporate presentations, the one with a wide-angle, high-definition security camera in the ceiling. The booking was confirmed. Then, I opened my email. I composed a new message. I sent it not to my father, and not to Dahlia. I sent it directly to CEO Grant Ellery. I CC'd Maria in HR. The subject line was, "Courtesy note and follow-up on my PIP." The body was short. "Dear Grant and Maria, thank you both for your patience as I continue to work through my performance improvement plan. In the spirit of transparency and civility, I've been doing a deep dive on our vendor contracts, and I believe I've uncovered a small, recurring accounting anomaly related to the Gray Veil Media account. It's likely just a clerical error, but the sum is quite significant. Given Dahlia's pro bono advisory role with them, I wanted to handle this delicately and politely to avoid any misunderstandings. To that end, I have scheduled a family dinner with my father and Dahlia next Tuesday at Delphine Rowe to clear the air. I would be so grateful if you both could join us. I believe with all of us in one room, we can resolve this collaboratively and find the best path forward. Best, Sloan." I hit send. The net was thrown. The email was a landmine disguised as an olive branch. By mentioning my PIP, I was performing my role as the diligent, reformed employee. By calling it a small anomaly, I was baiting them, making them think I was a fool who didn't understand what she'd found. By inviting them to a family dinner, I was creating an impossible fusion of corporate and personal pressure. They would read it and see a desperate, clumsy attempt to save my job. They would see an animal, trapped and wounded, trying one last, pathetic bluff. They would come. Grant would come to protect the fraud. Maria would come to manage the HR liability. And Dahlia would come to put me in my place, once and for all. They thought they were being invited to my surrender. They had no idea they had just RSVP'd to their own exposure. I was not inviting them to a dinner table. I was inviting them onto a stage. The Monarch Room at Delphine Row was larger than our last one, colder. The view of the Holloway skyline, a glittering tapestry of distant power, was framed by a single, vast window. The table was set for 5. My father, Charles, sat at the head, looking vaguely uncomfortable. A king in a kingdom he no longer understood. To his right sat Dahlia, a vision in a silk dress the color of blood. Her smile was nailed in place, a piece of brilliant, brittle armor. To my father's left were our guests, Grant Ellery, his CEO tan looking pale under the restaurant's sharp lighting, and Maria from HR, who clutched her wine glass like a life raft. And then there was me, sitting opposite them all, the picture of filial duty. The air was thick with unspoken agendas. They believed they were here for my capitulation. Grant and Maria were here to witness the final taming of the company's abrasive risk manager. Dahlia was here for the kill. My father was here because he was told to finding a path forward, my father said, raising his glass in a toast. His voice was hollow, the words tasting like ash in the air. We all raised our glasses. The clink of crystal was the only sound. As I set my glass down, I reached into my jacket and pulled out my pen, the same one I'd used to sign my PP. I placed it on the table, perfectly parallel to my plate. It looked like nothing. An elegant writing instrument. With a single, fluid movement of my thumb, I pressed the top. A click, no louder than a sigh. The tiny lens just above the clip began to stream a secure, encrypted feed. My lawyer, Mr. Eris, was now in the room, and with him, as per the protocol we had arranged, was a second, silent observer. Arthur Vance, the independent chairman of North Spur's Audit Committee. The deposition had begun. Dahlia's foot nudged my chair under the table. A playful little tap, a warning, a reminder of the rules. She thought we were playing the same game. "Be polite, Sloane," my father murmured, already starting in on his bread roll. It was his nervous tic, this reflexive appeal to a civility he did nothing to enforce. Dahlia leaned forward, her voice a low, intimate threat meant only for me. "I trust you've prepared your apology for Grant. Make it a good one. Sincere." I looked at her, at all of them. The stage was set. The audience was seated. I nodded slowly, a perfect pantomime of submission. "Of course," I said. My voice was soft, the one I had practiced. "I just have one small question first, just so I can understand the context for my apology." I turned my gaze to my father. "Dad, the Gray Veil media contract. I was looking at it, and I'm just a little confused about the payment structure. It seems unusual." It was the first move. My father, unprepared, blinked. He looked to Dahlia for his cue. He was a man who had spent a decade outsourcing his thinking. "Gray Veil?" he stammered, looking at her. "Dahlia, I thought you told them to handle that. The automatic payments." It was out. A simple, stupid mistake. He had just confirmed, on a live feed to the chairman of the audit committee, that he knew about the payments and that Dahlia was in charge of them. Grant's face tightened. Maria took a sudden, sharp sip of wine. Dahlia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went flat and hard. "Charles, darling, you must be mistaken. Sloane, this is hardly the time or place for shop talk." "You're right," I said, my voice still gentle. "It's so much clearer on paper." I reached down to the briefcase by my chair. I pulled out a slim folio, one by one. I slid the pages across the polished wood of the table. The first was the side-by-side comparison of the Gray Veil invoices and the market rate quotes. The 48% overcharge was highlighted in a pale, clinical yellow. The second was the high contrast, inverted printout of the contract cover sheet. The elegant DFK monogram was stark and undeniable. The third was the log from the uncollegial email macro, with Grant's name clearly listed under authorized by. Dahlia's face went white beneath her makeup. She stared at the papers, her PR smile finally cracking at the edges. Grant looked like he was going to be physically ill. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. And then it happened. Under the table, out of sight of everyone but the unblinking eye of the security camera in the ceiling, Dahlia's leg shot out. The pointed heel of her shoe slammed into my shin with a vicious, punitive force. The pain was excruciating, a shock of pure, white-hot agony. I didn't flinch. I had been waiting for it. The watch on my wrist registered the impact as a sharp vibration, and its microphone, pressed against my skin, recorded the muffled thud and Dahlia's sharp, furious intake of breath. The final data point, the physical confirmation of the abuse that underpinned the entire fraud. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the pain focus me. I ignored the throbbing in my leg. My eyes did not leave Dahlia's. I reached into my pocket and took out a small, black remote, no bigger than a car key. I aimed it at the far wall, which was painted a neutral, unassuming beige. I pressed a single button. A beam of light shot out from a Pico projector hidden in the floral centerpiece. An image bloomed on the wall, bright and devastatingly simple. It was a flowchart. At the top, a box labeled North Spur Systems. An arrow led down to a box labeled Gray Veil Media, with the 48% overcharge noted beside it. Another arrow snaked from there to a box labeled Halicon Gate. It was the path of the stolen money, and alongside the arrows were dates. The date the civility clause was officially added to the employee handbook, the date my PIP was signed, the date the uncollegial macro was activated. The correlation was perfect, undeniable. It was the entire conspiracy, diagrammed like a business school case study. Silence, absolute, profound silence. The clinking of forks and knives stopped. The pretense of dinner, of family, of civility, evaporated. We were no longer in a restaurant. We were in a courtroom. I broke the silence. My voice was no longer soft. It was clear, steady, and cold as ice. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, boardroom A. I looked at each of them in turn. Grant, Maria, my father, and finally, Dahlia. Please be on time. Dahlia finally found her voice. She laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. She leaned back in her chair, trying to reclaim some shred of her lost authority. "Sweetheart," she sneered, her voice dripping with condescension. "You don't call meetings." I looked right at her. The pain in my leg was afire, but my mind was a glacier. I let a small, calm smile touch my lips. "Whistleblowers do." Boardroom A was a glass box on the 40th floor, a sterile aquarium where the big fish swam. The table was a vast, polished slab of dark mahogany, reflecting the strained faces of its occupants like a still, black lake. It was precisely 9 o'clock a.m. They were all there. Grant Ellery, looking ashen, sat beside the company's general counsel, a severe woman named Evelyn Reed. On the other side of the table were the two independent directors, a retired banking executive and a tech entrepreneur, both looking grim and confused. And at the far end, next to an empty chair that should have been my father's, sat Dahlia. She was dressed in a pristine white power suit, a parody of innocence. She looked serene, untouchable, as if she were merely observing a tedious but necessary formality. And then there was Arthur Vance, the chairman of the audit committee, who sat directly opposite me. He had not spoken a word, his gaze fixed on me, waiting. I stood at the head of the table, my laptop connected to the room's main screen. The air was cold, the silence broken only by the faint, high-pitched hum of the projector. I clicked the remote in my hand. The first slide appeared on the massive screen behind me. The text was black, stark, against a white background. Civility as Control, a Risk Report. I let the title hang in the air for a moment. I was not here as Sloane Keating, the problematic stepdaughter. I was here as the head of risk management, delivering my findings. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm and even, amplified slightly by the room's sensitive microphones. "This report will detail a series of systemic, multi-million-dollar financial and ethical risks to North Spur Systems, its shareholders, and its executive officers. I clicked again. The screen changed. It now showed a split-screen view. On the left was the wide-angle, high-definition security footage from the Monarch Room at Delphine Row. On the right was a black screen with an audio waveform. Exhibit A, I said. A corporate meeting to discuss vendor irregularities. Held last Tuesday. I hit play. The silent video showed the 5 of us at the table. It showed me sliding the papers across the table. It showed Dahlia's face freezing, her mask of civility cracking. The audio, piped in from my watch's recording, was studio quality. We heard my father's blunder about the automatic payments. We heard Dahlia's hissed threat. And then, at the precise moment that the video showed Dahlia's leg jerking forward under the table, the audio captured a muffled thud and her sharp, angry gasp of air. Simultaneously, a third window popped up on the screen, displaying my biometric data, a red line representing my heart rate, which had been steady at 78 beats per minute, spiked violently to 135. As you can see, I said, pausing the display, the discussion of the Gray Veil account directly precipitated an act of physical assault by the company's lead PR consultant. A final image appeared. The scanned, time-stamped, and signed medical report from Drs. Alani. The clinical photograph of the bruise on my shin displayed in forensic detail. An assault intended to silence a legitimate corporate inquiry. Before anyone could react, I clicked to the next slide. It was a screen full of code. Exhibit B, the uncollegial macro, an automated script embedded in management software, designed to surveil and flag employee communications for specific keywords related to risk and compliance. I highlighted the relevant lines of code. The list of forbidden words. This script constitutes an undisclosed, and likely illegal, internal surveillance program. As the metadata proves, it was authored by Dahlia Keating's assistant and authorized for network-wide deployment by CEO Grant Ellery. Grant's name glowed in a red box on the screen. Grant finally broke. "This is completely taken out of context," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. This was a tool to foster a positive. Evelyn Reed, the general counsel, did not even look at him. She simply placed a perfectly manicured hand on his forearm. The pressure was slight, but the message was absolute. Shut up. I clicked to the next slide. It was the flowchart from the restaurant, now rendered in clean. Corporate graphics, the money trail, North Spur to Gray Veil, Gray Veil to Halicon Gate, the 48% overbilling calculated to the dollar, $4.2 million over 2 years. And next to the Gray Veil box was the high-contrast image of the watermark, the elegant DANTK monogram. Exhibit C, systematic wire fraud, I said, my voice dropping an octave, each word a hammer blow. North Spur Systems has been paying a 48% premium to a shell company, Gray Veil Media, which is secretly owned and operated by Dahlia Keating, who advises the private equity fund that controls this company. She created a problem, sold us the solution, and overcharged us by millions for the privilege. Mrs. Alabaster, the shadow advisor to Halicon Gate, is not an advisor. She is Halicon Gate's interest in this room. She is Dahlia Keating. Dahlia had been watching the screen, her expression unreadable. Now, she slowly leaned back in her chair, a faint, condescending smile playing on her lips. She turned her gaze from the screen to Arthur Vance. "Arthur," she said, her voice smooth and reasonable, "this is all very dramatic, but this is a family matter, a young woman lashing out, using her corporate position to settle a personal score. It's sad, really." The room was silent. She had played her final card, the hysterical, emotional woman. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "It stops being a family matter, Dahlia," I said, my voice cutting through her condescension like glass. "When the family sends the bill to the shareholders." The 2 independent directors exchanged a sharp, worried glance. I had just given them the magic words, the key to their own legal liability, fiduciary duty, shareholder value. I walked from the head of the table to the center, placing a single, slim manila folder in front of Arthur Vance. It made a soft, definitive thud on the mahogany. And it stops being an internal matter, I added, when it's already a federal one. Arthur Vance opened the folder. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a copy of a letter. The letterhead was from the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, Division of Enforcement. It was a formal acknowledgement of receipt for a whistleblower submission. It listed a case number. It was dated 2 weeks ago. My name was not on it. My submission was filed under a code name. But the letterhead, the case number, the official stamp, they were real. They were terrifyingly real. The air went out of the room. Grant's face, which had been pale, was now the color of old parchment. Evelyn Reed's professional composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened in something that looked like genuine fear. Dahlia's smile vanished, replaced by a stark, naked look of disbelief. She had been outmaneuvered. She thought this was a boardroom ambush. She had no idea she had walked into an active crime scene. Arthur Vance read the letter twice. He carefully placed it back in the folder and closed it. He looked up, not at me, but at the general counsel. "Evelyn," he said, his voice heavy with authority, "we will need to recess to discuss." "No," I said. The word hung in the air. A stunning breach of protocol. I had interrupted the chairman of the audit committee. I walked back to the head of the table. "There will be no recess," I said, my voice ringing with an authority they had never heard from me before. "The time for private discussions is over. What this company has is a cancer. You don't recess to discuss a cancer. You cut it out, now." I looked at Arthur Vance and the two independent directors, the only people in the room who were not yet legally compromised. "Or we can resolve this now." I clicked to my final slide. It was a list. "My proposal for resolution is as follows," I announced, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. 1. Grant Ellery is to be suspended as CEO, effective immediately, pending a full internal and external investigation into his role in the financial fraud and the illegal employee surveillance program. 2. All corporate and consulting contracts between North Spur Systems and Dahlia Keating, or any of her affiliated entities including Gray Veil Media, are to be terminated, effective immediately, for cause. 3. The board will immediately engage outside counsel to activate any and all clawback provisions related to the fraudulent overpayments and any executive bonuses that were predicated on the falsified user data. And 4. I took a breath. The company will publicly rescind the civility clause. It will be replaced with a new policy, Civility 2.0, drafted by me, which will explicitly protect and encourage good faith dissent and whistleblowing as a core tenet of our corporate culture. I turned off the projector. The screen went black. The sudden silence was deafening. I stood there, my presentation finished, my demands laid bare. I had taken their favorite word, their weapon of choice, and I had turned it into the name of their salvation. The room was mine. The immediate aftermath of the boardroom meeting was not a storm, but a vacuum, a profound, echoing silence as power shifted, as a structure built on lies collapsed in on itself. Grant Ellery was escorted from the building by security, looking not like a disgraced CEO, but like a man who had seen a ghost. Dahlia simply vanished. She walked out of the boardroom before Arthur Vance had even finished his first call to outside counsel, her face a blank mask, and disappeared into the elevator. The first public tremor came 12 hours later. At 9:00 p.m., a press release, vetted by a crisis team and signed by Arthur Vance as acting chairman, hit the wire services. It was a masterpiece of corporate minimalism, a document scrubbed clean of any human emotion. North Spur Systems today announced a leadership transition and a renewed commitment to corporate transparency and ethics. Grant Ellery has been suspended, and the company has terminated its relationship with all external communications consultants. Effective immediately. These actions follow an internal review prompted by a valued employee who bravely brought forward serious concerns regarding vendor contracts and internal policies. We are grateful for this employee's courage and integrity. Northspur is dedicated to fostering a culture where every voice is heard and respected. It was perfect. It admitted fault without admitting crime. It praised the whistleblower without naming me, protecting me under a corporate shield. It used Dahlia's own PR tactics to announce her execution. But a vacuum cannot hold. The story needed a narrative, and my lawyer, Mr. Aris, was a master at providing one. An anonymous source, a person familiar with the board's thinking, spoke to the Wall Street Journal. The story that broke the next morning was not about wire fraud. Not yet. That would come later. With the federal indictments. The first story was about something far more resonant, far more insidious. The headline was simple. The Civility Trap. How Northspur Systems Weaponized Politeness to Silence Dissent. The article was a sensation. It detailed the infamous civility clause in all its vague, terrifying glory. It spoke of a culture where asking hard questions was career suicide. And then, somewhere in the middle of the article, was the gem. The anonymous source had provided them with a 10-second audio clip. It was from a dinner. The source said, where an executive was being pressured. The audio was pristine, a man's voice. Be polite, a woman's whisper. Smile, sweetheart. By noon, that 10-second clip was a meme. It was stripped from the news reports and overlaid on videos of cats knocking things off shelves. It was remixed into dance tracks on LinkedIn. Think pieces erupted about weaponized civility and toxic positivity. On Twitter, Be Polite was trending. It became the internet's universal shorthand for corporate hypocrisy. For every time an employee had been told to shut up and smile while the company was on fire. Dahlia's public immolation was swift and brutal. Her Instagram, that carefully curated temple to kindness and cashmere, was flooded with comments. Under a photo of her shaking hands at a charity auction, thousands of people had posted just 2 words, be polite. By mid-afternoon, her account was locked. An hour later, it was deleted entirely. The website for her PR firm, Keating Communications, went down for maintenance. When it came back up, the entire Our Values page, with its talk of integrity and authentic storytelling, had been erased. She was not just defeated, she was expunged from the public record she had so meticulously crafted. Inside Northspur, the effect was electric. It was as if a spell had been broken. The day the news broke, I started receiving emails. They came not to my corporate account, but to a private, encrypted one I had used for my whistleblower submission, a link to which had been quietly circulated. They were from people I barely knew, engineers from the 3rd floor, accountants from the 6th, marketing associates I had only ever seen in the cafeteria. Thank you, one read. I was put on a PAP last year for being uncollegial after I questioned my manager about unpaid overtime. Thank you, said another. I was told my tone was disruptive when I pointed out a major security flaw in our beta. They shipped it anyway. You weren't the only one. Email after email. A chorus of the silenced. They were the ghosts in the machine. The friction that the civility clause had been designed to sand down into nothing. My fight, I realized, had never just been my own. A week later, Arthur Vance called a company-wide town hall. He stood on the stage and announced the formal, permanent rescission of Policy 7.4. In its place, he said, the board had just ratified a new policy. He put the slide up on the screen. Civility 2.0, a commitment to constructive dissent. The policy was my work. It explicitly stated that employees were not only protected, but encouraged to raise good faith objections. It forbade the use of any automated software to monitor or flag employee communications for tone, and it mandated that all dissenting opinions raised in major meetings be recorded and included in the official minutes. It was not a muzzle, it was a megaphone. The following week, I was invited to speak at an internal leadership forum. The topic was Respect versus Silence. I stood at the podium in front of 200 of the company's senior managers. I looked out at their faces. I was not nervous. My voice, when I spoke, was slow and clear. I did not run. Respect, I told them, is not the absence of disagreement. It is the respectful management of it. Silence is not peace. It is a cancer. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID said, Charles Keating. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Sloan, he said. His voice sounded old, tired. I saw the news, the press release. I'm sure you did, I said. There was a long pause. I think you might have gone a bit too far, he said, the words heavy with a lifetime of conflict avoidance. To do it so publicly, it's bad for the brand. I closed my eyes. After everything, he still saw it all as a marketing problem. He wasn't angry that Dahlia was a thief and an abuser. He was angry that I had made a scene. No, Dad, I said, and my voice was not angry, just profoundly weary. I didn't go too far. I was just being correct, and very, very polite. I hung up the phone before he could reply. The next day, the 2 independent directors asked me to a meeting. They formally offered me a new role, interim vice president of a new combined ethics and risk division. We need someone who knows where the bodies are buried, the retired banker said, with a grim smile, and who isn't afraid to dig them up, I accepted. My phone buzzed late that night as I was packing up my office, preparing to move to the executive floor. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. We're still family, Sloan. It was Dahlia's last, pathetic attempt to pull me back into the old world, to appeal to a loyalty she had never earned. My thumbs moved quickly over the screen. I typed my reply, the last words I would ever say to her. Family doesn't bill us for silence. I sent it, then I blocked the number and turned off my phone. I didn't take the elevator down. I took the stairs, all 40 flights. I wanted to feel the work of it in my legs. I walked out into the cool Halloway night and started the long walk home. On the way, I passed a small park, with benches and wooden tables for chess. I stopped and ran my hand over the cool, smooth, solid surface of an empty table. My fingers traced the grain of the wood. Out in the open, under the city lights. There was no under the table anymore. There was only the table itself, and I had a seat at the head of it. I booked the table at Delphine Row myself. I used my new corporate phone, my new title clear in my voice when the reservationist asked for the name. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a fractional hesitation. The name Keating, now linked with Delphine Row, carried a different weight. It was no longer just the name of a wealthy patron. It was the name of a scandal, the epicenter of a story that had dominated the city's business pages. The table was confirmed without a question. I asked for the same section, but not the same room. I did not want the soundproofed walls of the private chambers. I wanted the main dining room, out in the open, where the light was clear and the acoustics were honest. Mr. Eris, my lawyer, was waiting for me at the bar. He looked as rumpled and unassuming as ever, a man who blended perfectly with the mahogany and brass. He was drinking a club soda. He was not a man given to celebration, which is why I liked him. He was a man of transactions, of closure. Ms. Keating, he said, nodding as I approached. Mr. Eris, I replied. Thank you for coming. The filings are proceeding. The SEC is enthusiastic, he said quietly. But this dinner, this is not a legal necessity. I know, I said. This is a human one. It's the last piece of compliance. We were seated at a table for 3, set with the same immaculate white linen, the same heavy, cold silver. The third chair sat empty, a polite and silent void, a placeholder for the ghosts. It was for Dahlia, for my father's cowardice, for the Sloan Keating who used to sit here and bleed under the table. We had not yet ordered when the manager approached. He was the same man from both previous dinners. His demeanor, once professionally indifferent, was now a study in anxious obsequiousness. He was holding something. On a small, silver tray, resting on a folded cloth, was another cloth, a single, square, perfectly laundered and pressed linen napkin. "Ms. Keating," he said, his voice low, "we found this, after your last visit, in the Monarch Room. We had it laundered. Of course, we thought you might want it back." I looked at it. The lipstick trace was gone. The DNA evidence, the waxy smear of Dahlia's power, had been washed away. It was no longer a piece of evidence. It was just a napkin, a blank page. It had served its purpose. I didn't touch it. I looked up at the manager, and I smiled. It was a real smile, small and calm. "Thank you for taking such good care of it," I said. "Please, give it to your kitchen, as a contribution to the staff meal, a token of my appreciation for their hard work and discretion." His eyes widened slightly. He was expecting a tip, or a complaint, or a legal document. He was not expecting this. He was not expecting a gesture of simple, unperformative gratitude. "Of course, Ms. Keating, right away." He bowed, almost imperceptibly, and retreated with the napkin, its role in this story finally, fully, complete. My father arrived 20 minutes late. He came alone. He hovered in the grand entryway, looking lost, his eyes scanning the room. He looked smaller, his expensive suit hanging on him as if it were a size too large. The sharp, executive edge he once carried had been blunted. He was just a man, untethered from the woman who had been his compass and his shield. He finally saw us and navigated the tables, his walk uncertain. He sat down in the third chair without asking, the chair I had left for the ghosts. He looked at me, then at Mr. Eris, then at the tablecloth. "Dahlia couldn't make it," he mumbled, unfolding his own napkin. "She's busy with the lawyers." "I'm sure she is," I said. The silence settled. Mr. Eris took a sip of his club soda, his presence a quiet, neutral fact. My father fussed with his fork, moving it a centimeter to the left. He looked around the opulent room, at the other diners, at the waiters, anywhere but directly at my face. His old anxieties, the ones about appearance and brand, were flooding back in. He leaned forward, his voice a low, conditioned reflex, the last twitch of a dying nerve. "Sloane, be polite." The words hung in the air, but they were different now. They were not a command. They were not a threat. They were a plea. They were the only words he had left. They were pathetic. I did not get angry. I did not raise my voice. I looked at him, my gaze level and clear. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy, grainy and stark. I slid it across the white linen and placed it directly in front of him. It was one of the Gray Veil invoices, the one for $148,000, for crisis management, dated 3 weeks before the crisis it was supposedly managing. He stared at it. He knew what it was. His eyes traced the fraudulent numbers. "I am not asking you to apologize, Dad," I said, my voice very quiet, but carrying in the space between us. I've realized an apology from you would just be another form of marketing, another press release about family values that you don't actually hold." He flinched. "I'm not here for your remorse. I'm here to tell you the new rules. Dahlia was violence. Not just the physical part. Her smiles were violence. Her demands for silence were violence. This," I tapped the invoice, "is violence. It is theft, and it is deceit, and it is built on a system that demanded I be polite while I was being erased." I leaned forward. "You were her audience. You were her enabler. You sat there and watched it happen, and you told me to be polite. You sided with the violence, every single time. And I'm not asking you to love me. I am not asking you to be a father. I am just telling you that I need you to stop. I need you to finally, for once in your life, stop siding with the violence." He stared at the paper. He said nothing. His face was a mask of gray incomprehension. He could not process a world where politeness was not the highest possible virtue. He reached for his water glass, but his hand was unsteady. He put it down. He picked up his fork, his heavy silver fork, and in the silence of the restaurant, it trembled against the china plate. A tiny, metallic clatter. Clink, clink, clink. It was the only answer he had. A confession, telegraphed from his nerves to his hand. He looked down, his eyes fixed on the invoice, and he gave a single, short, jerky nod. It was enough. It was all I would ever get, and it was enough. I stood up. Mr. Aris stood with me, the waiter, sensing the abrupt end of the meal, hurried over with the check. I can take care of that, my father stammered, reaching for his wallet. That won't be necessary, I said. I pulled out my new corporate card. The black, matte plastic felt cool in my hand. Sloan Keating, VP, Ethics and Risk. I handed it to the waiter. Please charge this to the company. The expense code is Executive Ethics Training. It was approved this morning. I turned, and Mr. Aris and I walked away. I did not look back to see if my father stayed to eat his meal. I did not look back to see him sitting alone at the table, with the invoice and the ghost. I walked past the bar, through the heavy, ornate entryway, and toward the large glass doors. The night air of Holloway was cold and clean. As I stepped onto the pavement, the doors glided shut behind me. The latch caught with a soft, expensive, definitive click. It was a sound of absolute finality. It was the gentle, satisfying sound of a period being placed at the end of a very long, very difficult sentence. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. I thought of my leg, of the spot on my shin that had been a map of bruises for so long. For months after, there had been a phantom ache, a memory of the pain that surfaced when the weather was damp. I searched for it now. I felt nothing but the solid, steady strength of my own body. The pain, I realized, had never truly been in the bone. It had been in the silence. It had been in the acceptance of their rules. And ever since I had started making my own, the pain was gone. The morning after the dinner at Delphine Row, the digital landscape of North Spur Systems had been redrawn. The internal homepage, usually a bland feed of corporate news and birthday announcements, was different. Pinned to the very top was a single, stark announcement from the office of the chairman. It was short, stripped of all jargon. The board of directors extends its deepest gratitude to Sadke for their courage, integrity, and for demonstrating the true meaning of politeness. K. My initials, a shield, but also a signal. To those who knew, it was a coronation. To those who didn't, it was a mystery, a quiet testament to a battle won in the shadows. Below it, the official resolutions, passed in a late-night emergency session, were listed like articles of surrender. Grant Ellery, terminated. All contracts with Dahlia Keating and affiliated entities, nullified. A multi-million-dollar fund for shareholder restitution, established. And the formation of a new, board-level ethics and risk program, to be led, effective immediately, by me. My new office was on the executive floor, a corner suite with glass walls that looked out over the city. It had belonged to the chief marketing officer, a man who had been one of Grant's staunchest allies. He had resigned at dawn. The first thing I noticed when I walked in was the light. It was clean, unfiltered, pouring in from two directions. My reflection moved with me across the glass. A figure in a simple dark dress. I stopped and looked. My legs, no bruises, no phantom aches, just the clean lines of my own silhouette, standing straight and unbroken against the backdrop of the Holloway skyline. On the new mahogany desk in the center of the room, a single document was waiting for me. Policy 8.1, Civility 2.0. It was the final draft, the one I had submitted to the board. I picked up a pen, not my camera pen, which was now retired in a safe deposit box, but a simple, elegant fountain pen given to me by Arthur Vance. I uncapped it and signed my name at the bottom. My signature, once a mark of forced compliance on a PIP, was now the authorization of a new era. As I signed it, my new executive assistant, A sharp young woman who had seen my all-hands presentation and requested a transfer to my team that morning, walked in. "Your 9:30 is here, Ms. Keating," she said. "The product development team. They want to discuss the risk assessment for the Q4 launch." I smiled. The very same launch I had been put on a PP for questioning. "Send them in," I said. The team filed in, looking nervous, expecting the same old power dynamics. I motioned for them to sit at the round table in the corner. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice warm but firm. "I've read your proposal. I have some serious concerns. I expect you do too. Let's not pretend we don't." I looked around the table at their surprised faces. I capped my pen, the click echoing in the quiet room. Then I smiled. "Let's argue," I said, respectfully. The day was a blur of such meetings, of untangling the knots of fear and silence that Dahlia had tied around the company's heart. I was not a CEO. I was a doctor, performing a kind of corporate CPR, trying to get the blood flowing again to the parts of the organization that had been starved of oxygen for years. Late in the afternoon, as I was reviewing the first draft of our public apology to our users for the data manipulation, my phone buzzed. It was my personal phone, a number I didn't recognize. It could have been anyone, a reporter, a lawyer, a curious friend, but I knew it wasn't. I knew the frantic, desperate energy that would be on the other end of that line. I could almost hear the voice, laced with a toxic blend of threat and feigned concern. I could hear the lecture that was waiting for me, the final, desperate attempt to pull me back into the cage, the final lesson on how to be polite. I looked at the screen as it vibrated on the desk. Then I pressed the red button, declining the call. I held my finger on the number and blocked it. I would not hear that voice again. My education was complete. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my new office, I turned to my laptop one last time. I opened my email. I composed one final message. It was not addressed to anyone in the company. It was not addressed to my father or to Dahlia. It was a message to myself. A final closing of the ledger. The subject line was simply, "Final entry." The body of the email was 2 short sentences. "Respect is not silence, it is light." I hit send, archiving the message into a permanent, read-only folder. I stood up and walked to the window. The cleaning crews were starting to move through the building, and the lights in the surrounding towers were winking on, one by one. The sky over Holloway was a soft, pale, bruised blue, the color of a fresh start, of a blank page. The city was quiet from up here, its chaos rendered beautiful by distance. I turned back to my desk, my watch, my beautiful, minimalist, weaponized watch, was sitting by my keyboard. I picked it up. Its face was still dark, still in its high security, data gathering mode. I swiped my finger across the screen, entering the command sequence to reset it to its factory settings. The screen flickered to life, showing the time, the date, my heart rate, a steady, calm 68, a normal watch for a normal life. My finger hovered for a moment over the small, recessed button on the side, the one that activated the environmental recording, the button that had been my silent witness, my secret weapon, for months. My thumb had sought it out in moments of stress, a reflexive reach for the comfort of evidence, for the promise of a future reckoning. I no longer needed it. The reckoning had come. I pulled my fingers away from the button. I strapped the watch onto my wrist. It felt different now, lighter, not a tool of war, but a simple teller of time. I picked up my briefcase to leave. On my laptop screen, the final page of my official whistleblower report to the board was still open. I had concluded not with a summary of the fraud or a recommendation for legal action, but with a single, philosophical observation. It was the distillation of everything I had learned, the final word in my new dictionary. I read the sentence one last time, my own voice a whisper in the quiet, darkening room. Politeness is not a muzzle, it's a mirror. I closed the laptop. The story was over. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you'd like to help it reach even more people, you can support us by hitting that hype button. It truly makes a difference and helps these stories get heard.